consider and say that justice for him is only a functions in total denial of the constitutional principle of the independence of judicial power and international standard of judicial independence. And when he dissolved the High Judicial Council, he created a provisional council, and when he created this provisional judicial council, the judicial power become submitted to the executive power because he himself appoint the members of this provisional council, and he do this in flagrant violation of the principle of separation of power in the democratic system. As you know, our constitution, the constitution of 14 guarantees the separation of the power. We have executive power, legislative power, and executive power. And Qais Said, when he dissolved the High Judicial Council, before also he dissolved the parliament. And we found ourselves in a situation with the concentration of legislative and executive powers in the hands of the presidents of the republics, and we add for this the judicial power. And then he take a decree law, the decree law number 11, which dated, which is on 12 February 2022, and with this decree law he gives himself wide prerogative by appointment of the and nomination of judges, disciplinary. He can take also disciplinary measure against judges, and he also has the power of the judicial career for the judges. And with this decree, prohibit freedom of association, magistration. The members also of the temporary High Judicial Council are directly and exclusively nominated by the president himself, as I say, and the president of the government and the minister of justice have exclusive prerogative to send reports to the temporary High Judicial Council to open disciplinary inquiries against judges. So judges could be dismissed of the basis of that inquiries, and the president of the republic himself can revoke judges. So we found ourselves in situation that the executive power has all the power on the judges, and these steps was continued by collective dismissal of 57 judges without any procedure or a possibility of appeal, on total denial of the rights to have a fair trial and of the principle of presumed innocence, and without any guarantees to defend themselves. So when the president takes this decision of dismissal of 47 judges, the judges go to the tribunal administrative and obtain 49 of them obtain a decision from the administrative court suspending the dismissal decision for them, and instead of this decision, the of justice refused to respect this decision, and after this they go to another step with fabricated accusations against dismissed judges, more than 100 of accusation and for many of them on the law of what we are living now in the situation which judges are afraid, and we are living a campaign now of arresting of political and lawyers and judges and members of the parliament and simple activists in the social media, women also. We have fighting for the dictatorship of Qais Said, which who are fighting the coup since 20 July, as I say, and the only crime of all this is to be opposite to the coup and to opposite to Qais Said, and these arrested are on basis on cases empty. We find in the cases, for example, you have a meeting to take a coffee or a dinner with themselves, and for example, have a meeting with a strangled person office of United States. We have a political person, Hayam Turkey. We accused him for have a meeting with American diplomatic. So have meeting with diplomatic now is a crime in Tunisia. And also we when we discuss, we try to have explication, and we ask judges why you arrest this person. The judges say that if I don't arrest this person, I myself will be arrested. So the situation is very strange in Tunisia, and it's very dangerous now to live. We haven't security, and I think that as you know, the High Rapporteur for lawyers will come to Tunisia in May, in 14 May, to visit and to see this situation as I describe it now. So we are fighting now with people who are living in value of democracy and freedom to make this person who are arrested for fabricated cases outside the prison. And as you know, the political situation in Tunisia is very bad, with crime of discrimination committed by the president against African brothers, and we have each day we have problems with the speech of our president, because his situation is not normal, and he is unable to conduct a country, because he's not competent to. Now we are fighting to change this situation. As you know, also the legitimacy of the President Said is not okay, because as you know, only 11% of the voters took part in the election, because people has boycott, and the opposition has boycott the elections. So now we have, by democratic way, we have to change the situation in Tunisia, and we call to all friends in the world to help, to assist us to realize this object. And if you have any case, any question about the persecutor person who are now arrested, or who are now in the dangers of to be arrested, I can answer to this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abderazzak. I do have a question, but I'm going to ask you the question now, but you can answer it later after we hear the other panelists. But my question is mostly about what kind of resistance is there from the judges and from the lawyers in Tunisia? I know that in the beginning we had a whole month of strikes, or a strike by the lawyers and by the judges, but what happened after that? It seemed like they all went, silent.
Yes, I confirm that when in the beginning of the dismissal of the judges, judges have organized a hunger strike, and some judges have organized a hunger strike, and the situation in Tunisia become each day more dangerous, because the system is become very comment dirais-je, oppressed, and so everybody now has afraid, even lawyers, even judges. So the situation is not easy. It's and instead of all this, the civil society, the parties, some parties which are opposite to the coup, are now fighting with organizing the meeting, and some sitting before the Minister of Justice. For example, today there is a sitting before the Minister of Justice organized by some opposite parties and the family of the persons who are arrested to ask, to demand to put out the prison out of to liberate the political prisons.
Thank you very much, Abderazzak. We go to our friend Saeed Benarbia. Saeed, welcome. Please, you have the floor.
Thanks, Radwan, and thanks, Mr. Kilani. I think I will just try to respond to what Radwan about what happened, why we are moving from a justice system that resisted or that acted as a check on the president's power grab to a system or a judiciary that is now being used as a tool of oppression. So what happened during these 20 months that moves us from a situation in which the higher judicial council on 26th of July was saying that exceptional measures cannot be used in relation to the judiciary, that the office of prosecutor was independent, the judiciary was independent, to a situation now in which judicial institutions are subordinated to the executive, and the judiciary and the prosecutor's office are used as a tool of oppression in terms of targeting political opponents, journalists, human rights defenders, and activists. I think what happened can be structured around two steps. The first step was the dismantling of all the guarantees related to the independence of the judiciary. I will specify here just comparing the 2014 Constitution and the 2022 Constitution. 2014 Constitution provided for the office of the prosecutor to be independent. It provided for the higher judicial council to be independent, composed of majority of judges who are elected by their peers. It provided for military court jurisdiction to be restricted to military offenses. Most of the legislation that should have implemented these constitutional guarantees were not implemented over the past 7 or 8 years until the power grab of 25th of July. But without these guarantees related to the independence of the prosecutor's office or the jurisdiction of military courts or the independence of the higher judicial council, the Constitution of 2014 and some legislations, including the law on the higher judicial council, provided for a system that allowed for the institution itself, for the judiciary itself, to be independent institutionally and to not be subordinated to the executive. And historically, the higher judicial council in Tunisia was presided by the President of the Republic. The Vice President was the Ministry of Justice, and the judiciary as an institution and as a system was subordinated to the executive. What the 2014 Constitution established, what the uprising of 2011, 2010, 2011 established, is a judicial system with sufficient guarantees that can act independently without interference from the judiciary. On the 25th of July, the president was clear about his intention. He declared himself to be the chief prosecutor, the head of the prosecutor's office. You don't declare that just out of nothing. If you want to be the head of prosecutor's office, is that you have a clear idea what the prosecutor's office should be or the role of the prosecutor should be. And if you go back to all the statements by the president over the past 20 months, prosecutor's office serves in the framework that's provided for by the president to initiate proceedings against those who are suspected of opposing the president. A concrete example, when the members of the parliament met online, defying the closure of the parliament by military charge and military personnel, the president summoned the Ministry of Justice and ordered her to initiate criminal prosecutions against the members of the parliament based on charges of conspiracy against the state. And most of the investigative judges and prosecutors at the time that were receiving such orders, they refused to comply with them, and they refused to initiate such criminal prosecutions against judges. It's not surprised that those prosecutors and judges, investigative judges, were removed or are part of those judges who were removed from office by the president. So that's about prosecutor's office. The higher judicial council as an institution It resisted the power grab in true statements. It resisted the subordination of the the judiciary as a whole to the president and to the executive increase that the president developed, in particular the one on penal reconciliation, found them to be unconstitutional and illegal. And because they consistently say no to the president initiated a smear campaign against the members of the High Judicial Council, suspended their financial allowances, and then dissolved the Higher Judicial Council altogether, and re-established a new temporary Higher Judicial Council that is totally subordinated to him, that is not based on election, but rather on appointment, and all the members are appointed either directly or indirectly by the president, indirectly when they are ex-officio members. And because of such subordination at the institutional level, we have now a temporary Higher Judicial Council that is failing to act in defense of the judges and prosecutors who are being subject to arbitrary criminal and disciplinary proceedings. We have also Higher Judicial Council who is silent when such criminal prosecutions and politicized judicial proceedings are initiated against the president's perceived opponents. The Higher Judicial Council is just condoning such initiatives. So the dismantling of these guarantees of independence, both at the prosecutor's level or the judiciary level, the Higher Judicial Council level, led to a situation in which the justice system can be used as a tool of repression. So how it has been used as a tool of repression? I think the repression didn't start with the arrests of the opposition members. A little bit, these criminal proceedings, I think it started with the judges and prosecutors themselves. So this is the resistance that was the question about. Over the past summer, 49 judges and prosecutors had a decision or judgments from the administrative courts that reinstate, that found that arbitrary dismissal by the president through Decree 35, that dismissal was arbitrary. And it was arbitrary because for months, the administrative courts asked both the president and the Ministry of Justice to provide any evidence that those judges who were arbitrarily dismissed were involved in any kind of disciplinary or criminal misconduct. And both the presidents, institutions of the president and the Ministry of Justice failed to provide such evidence. And because of the failure to provide such evidence, the administrative court issued that decision and reinstated 49 of them. Instead of enforcing that decision by the administrative court, the Ministry of Justice just initiated politicized criminal prosecutions against these judges. Now, I can give concrete examples about what do we mean by the prosecution of judges and prosecutors. And again, just to highlight that among the 57 judges and prosecutors that were dismissed, there was the former president of the Higher Judicial Council, former president of the Judiciary Council, the president of the Appeal Court in Tunis, president and the general prosecutor and prosecutor of the Tribunal of First Instance in Tunis, and the dean of the investigative judges in Tunis, in addition to other judges and prosecutors. So some concrete examples of the politicized criminal proceedings against these prosecutors or judges. There is a deputy prosecutor right now who is charged with establishing a terrorist enterprise based on a complaint by a police officer against him. The charge is based on the claim that the deputy prosecutor refused to issue a search warrant in a terrorism-related case. Police officer is accusing him of obstructing his work and not complying with his demand. And that deputy prosecutor right now is subject to criminal prosecution and is charged with terrorism-related charges. Prosecuted because, again, based on a complaint by security officials who accused the deputy prosecutor of being prejudiced against him. Another is prosecutor based, again, on a security report by police officers who said that that judge is associated with the suspicious group relation to terrorism. And I think in those three cases, when you look at the case files, when you talk to the lawyers of those judges or prosecutors, there is nothing there that substantiates any of the claims or the charges against them, apart from these police reports or these police complaints. And to highlight here that it is the role of prosecutor to assess the evidence and to decide whether or not he or she should issue a warrant arrest, and it's not the other way around. It's not the police who should be controlling the work of prosecutors. The former president of the Higher Judicial Council, who was accused by the president of being corrupt, together with other members of the Higher Judicial Council, is being prosecuted, again, based on terrorism-related charges, joining terrorist enterprise, establishing terrorist enterprise, again, based on a complaint by another judge who were dismissed by the former Higher Judicial Council. And you look again at the case files and you talk to the judges, the lawyers of these judges, and there is nothing there that can support or substantiate any of the accusation against these judges. But it's not only the judges, it started with the judges. And this is where we started seeing, at least in the Tunisia after the revolution, that cases are being looked at not based on the law, or cases are initiated or prosecutions are initiated and continued, not based on the law, not based on the evidence, but based on the instructions that these prosecutors or judges who are initiating these cases are receiving either from the Ministry of Justice or sometimes even from the President. And here it's important to highlight that the President himself clearly stated that those who liberate or those who discharge the accused are complicit in the case and complicit with the accused. And I think when we started with the judges, then it became just easier for them, for the judiciary that is now subordinated to the president, to initiate such criminal cases against opposition leaders and against activists and journalists. And I will focus just on two cases because I know that's running a bit behind in terms of time, in relation to the implementation of Decree 54. Decree 54, again, initiated, adopted by the president, as it's been the case with all the decrees that were adopted over the past 20 months without any consultation, without any democratic legitimacy, and establishing that anyone who is publishing false information by any means can be punished by between 5 to 10 years imprisonment, 10 years imprisonment if the person who is the subject of such false information is a public official. Based on this decree, we had cases of individuals, lawyers, for example, lawyer Mahdi Zakruba, who is prosecuted based on Article 24 of Decree 54, based on a complaint by the Ministry of Justice because this lawyer criticized the politicization of judicial proceedings against the judges. We have a student who published something on Facebook in relation to the protests in the city of Tadamon, who is also prosecuted based on Decree 54, publication of false information. And we have Business News, a media company, their director is again being prosecuted based on Article 24 of Decree 54 because of publication of an article that the head of the government deemed to be critical of her work as a head of government. So to summarize, I think when we look at how we went from a judiciary that was, or at least judicial institutions that were acting as a check on the president in the early days of the power grab, to a situation in which we have proceedings and in which both the prosecutors' office and the judiciary as a whole are being used as a tool of this institutional risk of judicial independence, and because of the dismantling of such guarantees, in which the administration of justice is not based on the law, is not based on evidence, it is based rather on political considerations and political instructions. Thank you.
Saeed, for this gloomy picture. This is really, really shocking. These recent developments against the judges and against the lawyers. Panelist on this panel, Professor Dan Brumberg. Hi, Dan, and welcome. The floor is yours.
When I first started coming to Tunisia, the thing that struck me was that I never met so many lawyers on constitutional law, legal. Of course, the president himself claims to be an expert. Capita seemed to me have more in the region. So quite extraordinary. And of course, everything Saeed has said, and Abderazzak is, I'm not going to repeat S when we know that the president said doesn't agree with take is, of course, against the state and frame of mind that is really projected. And it's, of course, very dismaying. But I don't want to talk about sort of the record of the abuse of the subordination of the judiciary. Populist autocrats who are trying to place themselves in this is to go after the judiciary and subordinate to the executive. I mean, we see that we saw that in Hungary. We see this in Poland. We've seen this most recently in Israel. I mean, this is a very, and we saw that in Brazil. It's a very familiar. We see aspects of it even in the United States. I have to say, it's a very familiar pattern, and it's almost predictable. The difference, one of the main differences with the Tunisian cases, it's this subordination of the judiciary is usually accomplished through the strange. Organized with the allies of the president, often through a rule which gives the ruling party and the president the ability to transform the parliament to a vehicle that legitimates the subordination of the judiciary. This has not been the case. The president got rid of the parliament right away and has been operating and pursuing this whole project of trying to restructure the judiciary through his allies in the military and the security apparatus, chiefly out of campaign of terrorism and intimidation that's taken place on Facebook and really greatly magnify the president's reality that it actually has a kind of social base. Intimidate opponents of this, and to go after them and sort of essentially accuse them of crimes and on social media. And this is something that has worked to the president's favor, which is very dismaying. But I also want to say that we have to sort of just take a step back and understand what it is about the broader situation in Tunisia that has helped to sort of facilitate the president's campaign. And I think the broader situation is massive political elite and all the political parties, massive, in other words, a form of politics, form of democratic politics that over the years was increasingly removed from the everyday reality of Tunisians. And that is what helped get the president elected. And all the polls we see so far suggest, and the ones I see are very reliable, the president is the only political leader who has major political support. The most recent poll that I've seen, and again, it's very reliable, so support for political parties at about 5%. There isn't a political leader among and with all due respect, Mr. Abderazzak, there isn't a political leader that seems to have commanded much support among the wider political populace in these recent polls. And they can't, the institution which undertook these polls has not yet published them, but they once again, they seem very credible and scientific and so on. And the polls have been reaffirmed several times over the last few months before the escalation of the authoritarian onslaught from the president. And what they really tell us is that what the president is banking on is this degree of alienation and estrangement from the political elite and from the political institutions. And in that regard, he's a very rational player. He understands that he has some understanding of this context and how to use it to his favor. And I wouldn't, by the way, agree with the conclusion that there was a boycott of the parliamentary elections, which shows that there was a rejection of the president. I don't see that as, that's an understandable position for some people to take. I don't think it's substantiated. I think what happened is that people simply are not interested in these formal political institutions and see them as basically irrelevant in the effort to sort of, and of course, the president manipulated that point and tried to argue, well, they don't care about these institutions. That was a self-serving remark, but it wasn't untrue. You do not have in Tunisia the kind of massive political mobilization you have had in other countries going through so-called democratic backsliding that might give the ruling political elite the kind of leverage and power they need to stand up to the autocratizing agenda of the president. The protests that have thus far taken place of the kind that you would expect to find if you're looking for the kind of movement that pushed the president back from the abyss. It's not there. It's the continued disillusionment with the political experiment that really was increasingly seen as a kind of political theater based in Tunis, but not relevant to the lives of many Tunisians. And another reason why you don't see the leverage they need to negotiate with the regime, and that's what you're looking for, right? Is that the political support. The polls that I've seen suggest that Taboubi has like 8% trade union. Not to completely step away from the president, and which is a familiar in order to protect its means that the organization, one mass organization that has the ability to sort of engage and mobilize a large number of people in theory, right, 700,000 to 800,000 members, has thus far really not. I mean, Taboubi has denounced the president and so on. There protests, brief protests in a number of cities, but we don't see mobilization that would show the society is completely enraged with the president, is ready to go. And so we have a kind of situation where he can get away with it. Whether we're talking about Ghannouchi or any other political leader, there's just the poll numbers are shocking. No, they're not shocking. In fact, they're quite predictable. Sort of the gloomy situation, Radwan, that you just described, because I'm also trying to think about everything I know as a political scientist. It tells me that there are certain things you need in place that could provide some measure of to push this kind of president that we have in Tunisia from desisting and respecting human rights and stopping his effort to subordinate the judiciary and put political leaders in prison. I mean, the whole thing is atrocious, but I don't see it. And until I see that evidence of that, I'm not sure exactly how the political project of the president will be stopped or reversed. And of course, the message from Washington, D.C., from the Biden administration, until only the last week or two, has not been encouraging, right? I mean, it's, I think that quite the contrary. Earlier on in this process, we saw messages that sort of could be viewed by the president and his team as basically giving them not a green light, but suggesting the United States was not going to get in the way. U.S. government wouldn't get in the way. And that too is, of course, and that has changed. We've seen it in the last few days, but maybe this is probably this could be too late too little, too late. And finally, I'll just add that one wild card, of course, as it's always said, is the economy, the IMF deal. It is very an agreement for economic and market reforms without an independent judiciary that will encourage foreign market when foreign investors can go a lot of other places. So the notion that you can have market reforms without but it could be that the president will try to sign the agreement anyway because he will try to maximize whatever leverage he can get from that. And we don't know how the UGTT will respond if such an agreement is signed because they've already denounced it and said they would oppose it. But of course, if they did, we could have a dynamic of a larger mass mobilization that might change the balance of power. But for now, we have a kind of we have a situation that is not working to stop this autocratization and compel the president and his people to restore some basic elements of democracy, rights, and so on. It's not obviously an encouraging situation. I hate to put it that grimly, but there it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your presentation. You touched on two important points that I think need and deserve more reflection, maybe not in this webinar, but in the future. The first one is really the role of in Tunisia in supporting Qais Said. Even before the coup happened, I was in Tunisia for 6 months when, literally hundreds and thousands of fake accounts were used to bombard social media, on a daily basis. Qais Said, and to portray democracy as a failure, and the parliament as a failure, and all the political parties as a failure, and all of that. It was a very consistent, started for about 6 or 7 months before the coup and continues to this day. It's very well organized, it's very well funded, and it has impact. It creates this environment where people think, oh, okay, that's the public opinion. That's what all the Tunisians think. That, and then people tend to follow that public opinion. If you hear it, 100 times a day. And as you know, in Tunisia, everybody is on Facebook. But I do take issue with the validity right now because of the environment of fear that exists in Tunisia today, that Abderazzak has spoken about and Said has spoken about. People are afraid. And these polls, they go to people's homes and conducted by other Tunisians who they don't know who they are, they've never met before, asking them, do you support Qais Said or not? Or do you support political parties? Or do you support Ennahda? In a democracy, yes, people would be able and willing to say what they really believe. But I don't think that exists anymore. I don't think in Tunisia today, people are safe, if they say that they are against Qais Said or that they support a particular opposition party, Ennahda or otherwise. So I think there is a new environment in Tunisia that really makes this polling that is being conducted, I think a lot less reliable than they used to be before the coup.
Well, let me respond very quickly to that.
Sure.
So you're right on the media campaign, but I don't think the media campaign created the perceptions we're talking about. They magnified them. They didn't create them. They existed before these media campaigns.
Some of it.
And second of all, the polls have been consistent before this moment of increasing terrorism or terror emerged. The polls have been quite consistent for months and months and months. I don't think, and the results have been consistent over time. So that would suggest that it's not a consequence of the present environment. And I think the political elite, if I may be just perfectly frank, is not doing itself any favor by by minimizing the extent to which there is disillusionment with the political parties. I mean, I understand how hard this is to absorb. I understand how difficult it is to reconcile oneself with those realities. But I think that there is a natural human impulse to sort of question the viability of these polls. But I think they're actually quite reliable. I've seen the methodology. I wish they'd be published, but they really show us that what we've known now for the last 2 years.
But then, homes.
Well, you know, that they were doing
That's
that.
the methodology.
They were doing that before the campaign of this campaign.
Okay, and
that's a function of something that happened over a period of years, and not just in the last year or two. This is.
But do you think that right now in February or in March, if you go to a Tunisian in the street or in his home and ask him, do you support Qais Said or not, or do you support Al-Nahda or any?
The reverse, Redwan, the polls show us that there was declining support for the president over the last 8 months, not increasing, and that should suggest that people actually are expressing their point of view. So I simply don't agree with you. I think that, and again, I think if you're trying to sort of talk your way around these polls, you're not really focusing on the problem at hand, which is the absence of a kind of popular groundswell, even in the middle class that's harassed, that's struggling every day to get through the day. I understand it, but there's something much deeper going on that needs to be, I think needs to be addressed and not simply ignored.
Okay. Well,
yes,
go ahead.
I may just about this actually, because there were also polls that says during, the power grab or the early months of the power grab that the president was at 80%, 90% of popular support, even though people were queuing for bread and they couldn't even find, basic needs, to survive. And this idea that the president is at 80%, 90%, and then he's organizing, and in a constitutional process, organizing a referendum, and then a referendum is supported by a quarter of the population, assuming that the numbers of the EZ are accurate, and there are reasonable grounds to believe they are not, that doesn't also match up with the support. A president who has the support of organized presidential parliamentarian election only for 10% or 11% of the population to turn around. That also doesn't match with that kind of narrative of polls. So we can look at whatever polls and methodology. I think we need just to focus on the actual figures and the numbers actually of people of the referendum or of the parliamentarian elections that were organized. And if anyone look at those numbers and believe that the Tunisian people give mandate to the president to overhaul the political system, or that parliamentarian or that parliament has any kind of democratic legitimacy, then there is something wrong about our understanding of democracy. So we have been criticizing a parliament that was elected by 50% or 45% of the population. And somehow now a parliament that is elected by 11% is more legitimate than the previous parliament. I understand the narrative about people dissatisfied about democracy in general, not only political parties, but especially political parties. That dissatisfaction is associated with the fact that whatever you can say about the Tunisian democracy over the past 10 years and freedom of expression, it never translated in the kind of economic reform or economic growth that would have an impact on the life of the population. And you compare the mass protests in Israel with the GDP by citizen of 50,000, with a situation in Tunisia of the GDP by capita of 3,000. There is nothing there that Tunisians gain from democracy that they would have go to call for, because they are supporting the president. Is not because they are happy with what's happening in the country right now. They're not being in the streets. It's just because they have basic life needs that they are dealing with on a daily basis without any kind of political agenda.
I completely agree with everything that says. I mean, everything he says, I agree with. I mean, there are lots of very compelling reasons, and the fact is that there isn't massive support for the president. And at whatever point it was, it just already declined. I'm simply saying that the that is a different question from asking whether people are mobilizing with the view of saving a set of institutions which a lot of Tunisian population wasn't heavily invested in. It's a somewhat different question, isn't it?
Okay, let's go to the questions. So we have one question in chat. Do we know who is funding the pro-Said activity online? Have you seen any studies or reports? I mean, of course, there are suspicions, but have you seen any reports linking? Has anybody seen?
I can just, like, one concrete example, actually, that's the attacks against judges and prosecutors. That you have Facebook accounts that would be just dropping information that is coming from case files. The case of the female judge that was accused of adultery. And you have the medical report of that judge being published in pro-president's Facebook account. There was a prosecutor actually who was investigating that kind of activity. And unfortunately, he's also one of the prosecutors that were dismissed. So it's, you have that element that, that there is a conflict, that, security services are fighting with judges or prosecutors, and there are information that are protected. The instructions that are thrown in these Facebook accounts, it was investigated. Unfortunately, the investigation didn't go through, or that the person who was behind it was amongst the prosecutors who were dismissed. And then there is the whole narrative, and you compare it on the 25th Tunisia, just compare it to what's happening when there was also the coup in Egypt, and how that narrative and how those books, how those social media accounts with the same message that this is against, or like a reform in a revolution, and that we are getting rid of Muslim Brotherhood or infiltrated the state, etc., etc. So there are, comparisons there, but unless you are conducting, the kind of thorough audits, digitally, and also investigations, because, as I said, some of the information that is being used about prosecution can only come up from certain stakeholders. Like, if it's medical report of a judge that is being accused of adultery and you find it on a Facebook account, there aren't a report. This is something protected by the secret, by the investigation. So who is the institution behind, leaking such information, always in furtherance of whatever message the president is advancing when it comes to combating judicial corruption.
Yeah, it seems very coordinated. And there's almost a pattern that is involved. The president will say something and hint at what he wants, right? He a certain character. He won't makes information on the internet about this person, right? And then once that's out, the prosecutors come in and say, well, we're so, there's, you don't need a lot of coordination to get this kind of coordination going, but it definitely seems pretty systematic and pretty effective. It's not haphazard. You've got strange web pages based in Miami. I mean, all kinds of weird things are going on, but the level of cooperation and coordination that systematic.
Yeah. Abderazzak, do you have an answer to that question about the so? You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Abderazzak, we can't hear you. You're still muted.
For me, the most dangerous thing in this discussion is that the Qais Said is using the law about terrorists, which is an exceptional law, to persecute the opposite. You are in your home and you don't know if the night you will be attacked by the police of Qais Said or not. The attacks are committed in the night while you are with your family and your your family. So our fighting, I think, now is to establish the state of law, because Tunisia now hasn't the condition to be a state. Because the only law which is dominate now is one person, the law of one person. Ask. No, there is Bashir Akrami, who is a judge anti-terrorist, and this judge has worked as instruction judge for the most dangerous cases, which are and Hotel Imperial in Sousse in 2015. The scandal now, because this judge now is arrested, and he is judges on base of the law of terrorists, because of the work which has done was on the control of the other judges, of a degree of judges, control of the appeal chamber, control of the cassation chamber. So it's very strange now that we are accused judges who has done his job. And I think that it's a very strange thing that we are living in Tunisia. Also, we have 14 lawyers who passed before instruction judge, and they because of cases in job as a lawyer. So I think that Tunisia has human rights, and Qais Said, who is a lawyer, who is a professor of lawyer, has to know that these conventions, and when he comes, for example, with a stranger, with diplomatic, as a crime, as you know, for example, Ridab al-Haj, Shawashi, we have participated in last November, to side event in the United Nations in Geneva, and he is arrested because his their contact with the diplomatic, with the stranger. So the situation is very dangerous, I think, in Tunisia, and we call to the fight for justice, for human rights, to be with Tunisia now, to tragedy.
Okay, we have 3 more questions which we're gonna take together, next 8 or 9 minutes. So, the independence of the judiciary is important and necessary, but how to frame the debate beyond the dominant liberal democratic conception model? Thank you. And then the second question is from Anne Moisan. If the IMF continues to stall on the might the president turn to? And the third question, also by Anne Moisan, is has President Said not learned from other successful autocratic disinformation campaigns? Is that what we are seeing, both with selected, targeted, and so each one of you has the floor, 2 minutes or so to answer these questions, either together or whichever question you want to answer. We'll start with you, Dan.
Yeah, well, I'm somebody who's a firm believer that the international standards of democracy, and while I respect cultural and local traditions, I think that we have to make. Not sure I would say that there is necessarily an alternative framework, because I think the framework is universal. And if we lose that commitment, said that, I think the problem is not that how mobilizes, and this is a problem we study a lot in political science, how one mobilizes how one links political leaders to followings and organic support in ways that give them leverage to negotiate. I think that's the issue. There's an alternative framework, because once you start doing that, you go down the slippery which end up being authoritarian. So I don't favor that. I would also say that this the two other things on first of all on the sort of mass media campaign, it's very effective in drawing lines and intimidating people and scaring people. So you don't need to arrest. You can make exemplary arrests of a bunch of people. This is not going to be the Egyptian model where they toss 30 or 40,000 people into prison, but it's very, in a smaller country like Tunisia, can be very effective. That's a very sad reality. And finally, of course, there are lots of autocrats that the president can turn to. He's been talking to the leaders of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China. I mean, there are ways around the IMF deal if there are actors in the region and beyond who want to support him. And I'm not surprised to see that he's been energetically pursuing some of these alternatives, including perhaps China, because he would, if possible, to get a get out of jail free card, and that could be partly it. So that unfortunately is a reality that plays into his favor.
But also important to add then that he's been pursuing these other autocrats for a year and a half right now, very unsuccessfully so far.
That's true, and maybe there won't be a success, but it's interesting to see some. There's lots of things going on in the region right now, and it's possible that he will still get some of the support he's looking for, but maybe not. In which case, then he'll have to turn to the IMF, and that, as I said before, I think everybody recognizes what happens if he does actually sign the deal and then acts to make it happen, opens up lots of possibilities. But I could easily see the president trying to find other sources of income, even if they had failed previously. I just think it's a predictable avenue for him to pursue.
Okay. Si Abderazzak.
Well, I would speak about the phenomenon of Qais Said. Qais Said used a speech, a popular speech, and this populist speech, yes, and this populist speech make people have dreams. When I think that is decreasing, قاعدة تنقص, because people and realize it that Qais Said don't give them anything, because their situation, their social is very bad now after near 3 years that Qais Said has all the decrease, voila, and people realize this fact. I think that they will make Qais Said going out, and I think in the prison, not out, but in the prison.
Thank you, Abderazzak. Saeed, you have the final word.
Sorry for my English, not very.
Okay.
I have to an effort, but sorry for my nearly English.
It's okay.
It's great, Mr. Kilani. Thanks so much. I think first thing, like the independence of the judiciary as liberal concept, or as some Facebook accounts, also pro-side, talking about it as a Western concept, and the West lecturing us about judicial independence. The right to an independent judiciary is a universal human right. Tunisia accepts conventions that guarantee the right to an independent judiciary, whether it's international covenants on political and civil rights, whether the African Union instruments, and there are decisions from the African courts, and there are decisions from the Human Rights Committee and other bodies that reiterate that Tunisia is bound by its obligations to ensure the independence of the judiciary, and the independence of the judiciary means an institutional independence and a situation in which the president cannot interfere with the judiciary, cannot appoint and dismiss judges as well as he is doing right now. Tunisia accepted these conventions, accepted these commitments and obligations under international law. It must comply with them and must respect them. And it must enforce the decision also of the African court on the states of exception. On the IMF and the judiciary, I think who is stalling, whether it's the president or the IMF right now, if you hear Western capitals, they are all pushing the president to sign that IMF deal. So something to and even without any conditions or without linking that measure to any kind of political reforms or the end of the subordination of the judiciary to the executive or the release of political prisoners. So it's difficult to see at this stage whether it's the IMF who is stalling. It's rather, I believe it's the president who is not willing to sign this. And again, what's the outcome? No one knows, but the financial situation is that. I think it's important also for the international community to not look at this IMF deal or to situation in Tunisia only through the lens of security, migration. It is important to ensure that the democratic experiment that survived in Tunisia for 10 years is re-established if there are checks and balances in the country, and there is not the one-man rule that is established right now. And I think just looking at the IMF can give loans to a country if the judiciary independence. I think they are happy giving loans to Egypt, and the judiciary there, it's worse than what we are seeing right now in Tunisia, with judges issuing massive penalties without any fair trial guarantees. So again, if those institutions and if those states members that are willing to promote the rule of law and still consider that the path for Tunisia is democracy, it's important to link any kind of financial support to concrete reforms on rule of law, checks and balances, separation of power, and judicial independence in Tunisia.
Thank you very much. This was a very, I think, a gloomy, webinar and discussion, but it reflects reality, and I think it's been very informative to understand what's really going on in Tunisia and the extent of the crisis in Tunisia. Thank you, Dan, Abderazzak, and Saeed for joining us in this webinar, and thanks to everyone who participated. And hopefully we will see you in the future, and in better days.
Let's hope it's perfect.
Thank you very
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.